Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're here today with our good friend Kathleen Norris. Kathleen is the award-winning poet, writer, and author of the New York Times best-selling books The Cloister Walk, A CD and Me, A Marriage, Monks, and a Writer's Life, Dakota, A Spiritual Geography, Amazing Grace, A Vocabulary of Faith, The Virgin of Bennington, and several volumes of poetry. Her new book is Rebecca Sue, A Sister's Reflection on Disability, Faith, and Love. Widowed in 2003, Kathleen now divides her time between South Dakota and Honolulu, Hawaii. That's my attempt to feel more like I'm in Hawaii with my shirt. She travels to the mainland regularly to speak to students, medical professionals, social workers, and chaplains at colleges and universities, as well as churches and teaching hospitals. For many years, she was the poetry editor of Spirituality and Health magazine. She now serves as an editorial advisor for the monthly Give Us This Day from its liturgical press, and writes for a weekly e-newsletter, Soul Telegram, Movies and Meaning, with her friend Irish storyteller Gareth Higgins. Also with Gareth, she co-authored a book titled A Whole Life in 12 Movies, a cinematic journey to a deeper spirituality. So Kathleen, welcome back. It's so great to see you, and many congratulations on your life of incredible work.
I know it makes me sound so busy. And I think, how did I have the energy to do all that? Well, I was a lot younger, and most of those books came out when I was in my 40s. But this new book feels like a real miracle to me. And I think it's something writers are so familiar with, the whole subject of rejection and what
Mhm.
do you do with rejection? Because I had wanted to write about my sister for a long, long time because she had a very difficult life. She was brain damaged at birth. She had what they call perinatal hypoxia, which means you don't get enough oxygen at some point in the birth canal. And so she had brain damage, but it was borderline. And she lived with our family all growing up and everything. And she turned out to have a remarkable personality. And I always wanted to write about her. And she was intelligent enough to know that she'd been brain damaged.
Mhm.
So that made life incredibly difficult for her. She ended up with a lot of emotional problems later on in her life. But I just started working on this book after she died. I thought I had a pretty good manuscript, and I sent it off to my longtime editor that I'd worked with on most of those books that you mentioned. And she just flatly rejected it, not interested at all. And I was really stunned because I knew it needed work, but I also thought that she would be a good person to help me work on it
Mhm.
because she's
Mhm.
helped with other books. She's a very good editor. And that was a real blow. And I just sat there for a while when that happened, that what am I going to do now? And the book kind of sat there in limbo for a long time. I would look at it now and then and think, well, what's wrong with it? And try to work on it a little bit. But it was very discouraging. And then finally, I think a few years ago, I said, I'm too old to wait around. If I'm going to do this book, I just have to get on it. I have to get back to it, find an editor who will work with me on it. And that's what happened. But it does feel like a miracle. But that limbo was almost 10 years. It,
Yeah.
oh, and of course, books take a while. So, I mean, I think it was exactly the right 10 years, and the way the book came out is better than anything I could have imagined. So, but books like this feel like a miracle when they
Yeah.
finally
Well, I
come out.
knew it was important to you, and I knew that you had been working on it for a long time. So I was so glad when I saw that IVP is publishing it. So
Yeah.
how did that work out
Well,
with?
it's the first time I've ever worked with a Christian publisher. And I kind of miss my Jewish editor because she was terrific at catching me whenever I would slip into what I call Christian jargon. She would nail me on it. And she's a wonderful editor. I kind of missed her, but the editor I had at IVP and the staff there have just been wonderful. And one of the things that when I said, I knew the manuscript needed work, one of the things that the editor at IVP pointed out to me is that I think we need to lose about 20,000 words.
Mm.
It's a lot, but I'm good at that. I think my background as a poet helps because paring things out, thinking, okay, I like this story. It's important to my family, but the reader doesn't need it. And just being able to take out a lot of stories and then even down to sentences where I would have a phrase where maybe I've used 8 words or 5 words and two or three would do. I'm good at doing that. So by the time I got through that process, we were 20,000 words down. And I
Mm,
think that also happened in a late with Dakota. And I think it's one of the things that made Dakota such a good book. It's still in print after all these years. It was published in 94. Um, is because my editor and I made a lot of big cuts. We cut things down. And that's one thing for writers, if you're afraid to cut things, if you think, oh, everything I've written has to go in there, you're usually wrong about that.
mhm, mhm.
It's really something that if you can do it in fewer words, that's usually better for the reader. And that was certainly true here. Once I got those words gone, then I knew I had a book. And I could add a few things. I could add a few little things in the writing of it. A couple of stories came kind of late, and but it all worked out. And anyway, working with IVP was just terrific. They've been really good.
Good, good. So in the book, you share a tremendous amount of what it was like growing up in your family. Can you share just a little bit about that?
Well, my parents are both educators, and they could tell that Becky wasn't developing normally, as you would say, normal, because like she never learned to crawl, for example. That physically was too much, required too much coordination. And she didn't have that. And my parents observed that, so they knew something was going on. It took them a while to get that diagnosis, but what Becky did instead was she learned how to scoot around the house like
Hmm.
a little rocket, just scoot where she could get wherever she needed to go. She had devised her own method of doing things. And so that was kind of an education. And then it was always tricky with her, though, because to distinguish between what she couldn't help and what she knew was wrong,
Hmm.
for disciplining a child, because all child
Yes,
will
yes.
test things and do things. And one of my favorite stories, in fact, she used to love to tell this story later on. When I was 14, I got my first lipstick, and we lived in Navy housing, which was a cinder block construction, building. And Becky was very jealous because she was too young to have a lipstick. And we shared a room, and I come in the room one day, she's writing on the wall with my lipstick. And I knew she knew that was wrong. I mean, that was clear. And I yelled at her, and I was really angry. I knew I couldn't hit her. I would get in serious trouble if I did. But I yelled at her, and she just turned and calmly said, "You can't hit me. I'm retarded." So she kept us on our toes, you know, and there were a number of things like that. And she developed a really strong personality. But she always, I think that the family was so important to her because she got a lot of disrespect at school, and this was in the early days of special ed. I mean, one of
Hmm.
her special ed teachers had the kids clean the room. That was the only thing she could think that they were good
Hmm.
for. It was
Wow.
awful. And she got a lot of rejection out in the world, but the family was the one place where she knew she belonged. She was loved, welcomed. She was just one of the family. And I think as I was writing the book, I began to realize how important that was to her, that she
Hmm.
always had the family. And even after the social workers told us she had a lot of mental issues in her 30s, they said, she's never going to mature unless she learns to be more independent. And so she moved into group homes at that point. But the family was always there for her. We didn't just leave her there. She
Hmm.
was part of every family uh, birthday celebration. She was still part of the family, very much so. But for the last well, almost 30 years of her life, I guess, she lived in group home
Hmm.
situations, and she did have to learn how to get along with other people who might not be as indulgent as her parents or her siblings and stuff.
So one of the things that I really like that you did is that on the cover, the jacket, you have a picture of her.
Yes.
And, quite honestly, she looks, similar to you. I mean, in some ways, her facial features. Um, were there other similarities that
Oh,
you
she
shared?
loved to talk about that. We both did. We both had terrible math anxiety. Becky's was much worse. I mean, she literally had no sense of numeracy at all. if you showed her a dollar bill or a $20 bill, the difference between 1 and 20 would be lost on her. I mean,
Mm.
I'm a little better than that, but we both had math anxiety. Neither one of us liked big crowds or escalators, and just a kind of sometimes a physical awkwardness that we had. And the fact, this is something that really haunted me, and I think it's one of the things that made me really want to persevere and get this book done, was I'm convinced that Becky was really meant to be the writer in the family.
Mm.
Because for years she wrote, every family member got these wonderful stream of consciousness letters from her. She was a good writer. And I was able to include some of the writing that she
Yeah.
did and reflections that she did so people can see she had a gift for writing. And of course, it was kind of stymied by her brain damage. She never really pursued that much. But the other thing is, when you point out the cover, I am so grateful that the publisher could use a painting that she made at a cancer center art class
Yes,
in Hawaii.
yes, yes.
And the little picture of her, she's holding one of the last paintings that she did. She did painted some flowers for her grandnieces. She had a real gift for drawing and painting, and we knew, and she signed that painting. That was the other thing I
Oh
was,
yeah, you can see it right at the
she was,
bottom there.
she was proud that she could sign her name. And so to have that on the cover, it really feels
That's
so
really
important
cool.
that it really worked. Everybody fell in love with, because publishers often have their graphics design people have their own ideas of what they want, but everyone fell in love with
Mm.
Becky's painting. And that Cancer Center art class was a real godsend. She just did all kinds of paintings in the last couple of years of her life. This wonderful teacher who now has a copy of this book. She's glad to get it. But Becky had all these gifts that, unless you knew her, um, we tend to discount people who are disabled.
Mm.
So Becky's gift for writing, Becky's gift for painting, Becky's gift for actually some pretty witty remarks from time to time.
Well, that's the
She
thing. You said that she's so funny, which you could
yeah.
see that come across in some of the. Can you have any stories you'd like to tell about that?
Oh, there's so many of them. Trying to think. Oh, I think that one of the things that I found this after she died, I found it in her journey, in her journals, that I'd never read before because they were her journals. Um, but I found a little thing that she wrote about getting together with me and mom. And uh, she said, what did she say? That we get together, and I can't find the quote, but we get together and we're both hyper, which would be probably true. Um, Although Becky would be more hyper than I would be. And she was comparing me. She called me a bookworm, and she's the bookworm, and I'm the butterfly. I like to spread my
Oh
wings. And I'm thinking,
yes, yes.
bookworm and butterfly. That, and a really witty remark about the two of us together. I read that and I just started laughing. I said, "Oh yeah, this is Becky the writer." And I think one of the things I hope that people take away from this is that, okay, you have someone who's disabled, and that's a label that people often use to just sort of discount people. You don't realize that there's a whole person there who might be an interesting person. And you see that all the time. And you see it especially when someone's in a wheelchair. Um, like when I was wheeling Becky around in the last years of her life to the cancer wards and stuff, if anybody was saying something, they would address questions to me. And
Hmm.
I say, oh, Becky can answer for herself. Just look at her and ask her, not me. That kind of, and I think people aren't even aware they're doing it, but we discount people who are disabled. We
Mhm.
realize that they might have gifts to offer. And I really hope that people meet the whole person here, that
Yes.
this portrait of a real person, a whole person who struggled a lot with her disabilities and her bipolar condition, which caused all kinds of problems for her. But this is a whole human being here, a whole kind of interesting person.
Well, one of the things you write about too is, toward the end of her life, she found a greater capacity for gratitude.
Oh, that was an amazing transformation. And it was wonderful to witness because I think one of the things that someone like Becky, who's been rejected and called slow and stupid and all these awful things, one of the defenses that people build when that's happened to them is that they become very narcissistic, very self-absorbed. It's a great defense. And so Becky was really very much a narcissist for most of her life, and we all kind of understood that. And one of my great stories about that I absolutely love, one day I was trying to tell her something that was very important. Something had really good had just happened to me, and I wanted to tell her. And I started telling her, and she said, "No, I go first. My story is more important than yours." And that is secretly what a lot of people feel, but Becky would just come out and say it. She lacked that filter of kind of sophistication that most adults would have. My story is more important than yours. And I knew better than to laugh. I said, "Okay, Becky, what's your story?" And it was probably a typical thing about a tension with a roommate in the group home or something. It was just pretty normal. And then I told her my story. But so she had that real deep-rooted narcissism. And somehow in the last maybe 5 years of her life, when she dealt with cancer, that's really changed. She became more genuinely interested in other people. She became more grateful for what people did for her. She thanked people all the time, which she never used to do. When she started doing that, the whole family noticed it. We said, this is really important. This is a significant change. And I mean, I don't know what who to blame for this. Probably the Holy Spirit. I mean, it's just, but it was a marvelous change, and it really struck me when one of the nurses at the cancer center who really loved Becky, she said, "Oh," she said, "we all love it when she comes." And of course, nurses there are so used to dealing with people who are angry and afraid, and they take it out on them, right? Well, here was Becky coming in and saying, "Oh, what drew you to this job? How long have you been doing it? Do you have any kids?" She would engage the nurses and the receptionists,
Wow.
everybody in these wonderful conversations. And she was grateful for what they were doing for her. And this nurse said to me, we loved it when she came. We really loved seeing her. She was so selfless." And I went, wow, that's change. And I told her, I said, that was a big change that happened, as she matured. And one of the things I realized very early on when I was a kid was that Becky was capable of maturing, and she was capable of change. It would just take her a lot longer.
Mhm,
I
mhm.
never thought she'd grow past that boy crazy phase at maybe 14, where you think if you wear the right eye makeup, some guy will fall in love with you. I mean, for years I thought she would never outgrow that. She finally did, but that kind of thing. But when that nurse said she was so selfless,
Mm.
that was like an earthquake. I thought, wow. And that was another thing that told me I had to write the book, because someone who undergoes that kind of
Yes.
change, that's an important story to realize that it
Yeah.
can happen. I think I've known a lot of very neurotic people, self-absorbed, neurotic narcissists who are just stuck in that. They're never gonna, it doesn't seem they're ever gonna break out of that shell. It's that self-protective shell is just too important to them. But with my sister, it just went away.
Well, back to your point about, she said her story was more important. Um, she also said you should write a book about me.
That's right. Well, the letter that she sent me when Dakota came out, because Becky had a good capacity for jealousy. It's good sibling rivalry, right? And when the Dakota came out and she wrote me this wonderful letter, she says, "Well, your book, everyone's reading your book and they're talking about it, and I tried and it was boring." She just wrote what was in her heart, and then she said, I'm weak, I'm crying as I write this because I love you." I mean, it's this wonderful stream of consciousness letter. But that was one of the things that she began to think, well, my sisters are right. So she did tell me that one time. And it was another thing that was an impetus to write the book. You should write a book about me so I can be famous like you. And when I held this book in my hands for the first time, I said, Becky, we did it. You're up there now. You're gonna be famous. And I hope you're enjoying this in heaven. Along with your parents would be very grateful for this book too. The fact that's why I dedicated it to them because they're the ones who really bore a lot of the guilt and the frustration. It took them a very long time to get that diagnosis of perinatal hypoxia.
Mm,
Because
mm,
in the 50s, when it became clear that Becky was slow, I guess you'd call it, the doctors said, oh, you should just put her in an institution.
mm.
And my brother and I were old enough, and my parents tended to consult us about major things anyway. They said, well, that's what the doctors recommend. What do you think? And my brother and I went, no way. I mean,
Mm.
she's part of the family. That's just crazy. And so I've always been grateful that that the doctor's advice we just ignored. And she did have to move into group homes later on, but she had a really good family life for many, many years and could grow and thrive in her own way within the family.
So I know that the book was, really important to you to get done.
Oh,
Looking
yeah.
back on it now that it's released into the world, what has writing it meant to you?
Oh, just telling so many stories that I've been carrying with me for years.
Mm,
And and then also fulfilling Becky's request.
mm,
I've written about her and and her life, which, in the scheme of things, uh, is a pretty insignificant life. Brain damaged young woman, who cares, right? I mean, but there she is. And one of the things that I knew when I began this book that something was up because I was teaching at Providence College for a year. It's a year-long residency there. And I was just in the spring semester, I was just starting to finally sit down. This is 2015. I'm sitting down and trying to write some stories. The first story that I remembered and decided that I should include is actually a fairly minor story. It's about taking my sister to a Beach Boys concert because my parents made me. I didn't want to do it. Becky was a tween, I think, and I was in high school. And but she really wanted to go to this concert, and I was the one in the family who could take her and all that stuff. So I did. And I finished writing this story, and I just broke down sobbing. it
mm,
it was an insignificant story in the scheme of things, but it just opened up something inside me, and I sat there weeping and sobbing and
mm,
shaking and thinking,
mm.
oh boy, what am I getting myself into? So I knew right then that this was an important book for me to work on and to finally see it through because I needed to tell these stories about my sister and her family.
Mm, goodness. Well, I know you're in the middle of, launching a new book, but are there any other like future books or projects that you're able to talk about at this point?
Well, one of my prayers is that I'll get back to writing poetry because that is my
Uh,
first love. And I have a few little beginnings of things. And I did write about that period, about 10 years ago. I did start a little series on ephemera, basically, the whole notion of ephemera. And I have a couple little poems that I did that are okay. I haven't even tried to get them published, but I'm hoping to get back to that. And then I do have another manuscript that's quite unwieldy. I'm not sure what's going to become of it, but a lot of that is taking these early stories from the desert mothers and fathers
mm,
and writing more about them and who they were, because they weren't all hermits. That's a myth. Um, they had communities in a sense. So it's about who they were and their wisdoms and their sayings, because so many of them really apply to our lives today. They have a lot to teach us.
mm,
So that's the impetus for that book. And again, that was something I was working on and put on hold for a long time. And it's just I'm now starting to get back to it, and um, I think it went to one editor, and I'll see what what she thinks of it. Because
Well,
I
that's
know
very
again, this
interesting.
is something that needs work, but there's so many times when these stories from the fourth century really come to life, and just a lot of very excellent wisdom, like get away from any man who argues every time he talks. That's advice. That is good advice, and
Really?
there's so much wisdom in those stories. And again, it's still kind of a well-hidden underground. There's been more written about them recently. There's a monk just wrote a book called Do Not Judge, because that was one of um, their main principles is that you do not judge anyone.
Hmm.
It's hard to live by because sometimes people do things you really want to judge them, and that was one of their main principles. So there has been a little more interest in them, but they still sort of stay in the realm of monastic studies, and I really think they need to be out there in the world for people. So that's we'll see what happens with that manuscript.
No, it sounds very interesting. So I hope that it
Oh,
happens.
yeah, I hope so too. And I keep thinking, how many more books do I have in me? I'm getting to be an old lady here, and we'll see.
Yeah, but you've still got this skill. I mean, incredible skill to write amazing books. So I appreciate when you share it with us.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, again, this is a wonderful book. Rebecca Sue, A Sister's Reflection on Disability, Faith, and Love. Go check it out at ivpress.com. Kathleen, thanks so much for joining us, and thanks so much for bringing that book out and persevering to make it happen.
Yeah, well, thank you. It does feel like a miracle, and I'm always glad for miracles.
Yes, yes. Well, thanks again for joining us, and best wishes.
Thank you.